Is the policy environment in China in 2019 any good for business? We asked Andrew Polk from Trivium and Jude Blanchette of the Crumpton Group to find out.
So Andrew, I think a lot of companies are worried about the state of their investment opportunities in China, as we've seen this continued deterioration in U.S.-China relations, especially over the past couple weeks, where we've seen a breakdown in any progress on a deal. And then last week we saw the Trump administration take some pretty extreme measures against the Chinese company Huawei. So probably in boardrooms around the United States right now, companies are asking, how's China going to respond to this? What's market access going to look like for us? And pessimism, I would guess, is probably sinking in. Are you seeing the same thing on the ground in Beijing? And what are you telling clients, essentially, about their ability to operate in China?
Yeah, basically, we're seeing this as an opportunity because the global narrative and the U.S. narrative towards China has swung so negative. We actually see that pressure starting to work on the Chinese, and they're actually now realizing that they're at risk of losing the global business community, and so are actively going out and trying to bring in wholly foreign-owned investment deals that couldn't have happened even 5 years ago. And so for companies that are willing to kind of look through the noise or to see that the pendulum of negativity is sort of perhaps swung too far, the reality on the ground is that actually now is a good time to get a deal in China that you couldn't before, because regulators understand that the narrative is so negative against them, and because they have just a fundamental need for FDI. They want to make sure that they don't lose the business community permanently because of the current tensions.
Now, are you optimistic that a deal is going to come to a conclusion with the Trump administration? And if there is a deal, how do you expect that to impact the operating environment for companies in China?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not optimistic, to give you a short answer. I think, obviously, I think everyone has now come to see that there are different elements of the tensions, right? There's the specific trade piece, there's the investment piece, and then there's the tech piece, which is obviously the Huawei and kind of decoupling idea is in that last piece. I think I'm at different levels of pessimism at all of them in terms of getting a deal done. I think it's really hard for me if we just focus on the trade piece to see, a positive outcome on the negotiations before late in this year at the earliest, so sort of November, December timeframe. I just think we've sort of obviously taken a step back in the past couple of weeks, and that there'll have to be a cooling off period, and both sides will have to feel some more pain economically before they can kind of credibly come back to the table. So pretty pessimistic on the trade piece. As I kind of mentioned the investment piece already, at least in the Chinese side, they are trying to do what they can to increase foreign investment into China, which includes American investment. And on the trade piece, I'd throw it back to you to say, what is your thinking in the long term of how all of this plays out? Are we now, in a totally new era where the decoupling has started and we can never turn back, or what's the medium-term outlook from your point of view?
Yeah, I think especially after the decisions last week, it's hard to see where we're seeing alignment or overlap between what the U.S. needs to get out of a deal, especially with the political consensus that exists here in Washington, D.C. on getting tough on China, on pushing back against China, the active desire on many national security side to see decoupling continue at a more rapid pace. So the political exigencies here about a deal, it's difficult to see where there's overlap with the political exigencies which exist in Beijing. And one of the things we lose in our coverage of U.S.-China relations is China has politics too, and that the Chinese leadership, especially Xi Jinping, is also trying to placate and manage political coalitions and political elite there as well. And so a deal which requires China to give up what our core function of their political economy are going to be very difficult and the way in which the United States is asking China to do it, which is very publicly, are also likely to make a deal difficult. And I think in the longer term, even if we do arrive at some sort of negotiated near-term truce, the sustainability of that deal is threatened by some of these administrative measures that both sides, but particularly the Trump administration, are taking, like adding Huawei to the entity list, even if as of today, there's a reprieve of a few months on this. These actions, from investment restrictions like CFIUS, to, I think, moving towards the Department of Commerce actions that they're likely to be taking on export controls. All these complicate the sustainability of this economic truce. So I think companies need to really be preparing for a new reality in which national security is the dominant paradigm through which both Chinese and U.S. governments are looking at trade and investment, cross-border M&A, the free flow of talent, capital investment. All these are now national security concerns, and we're seeing both governments bring to bear the tools to try and mitigate or minimize national security considerations. The problem is it's happening at a very rapid rate, and it's clear, I think, that as these measures are being taken, a lot of folks in these governments don't quite have a grasp on the second and third order effects of these decisions. So companies should really, I think, buckle up for a period of pronounced volatility as these governments try to navigate this new tech war, or code wars, as some people are calling it.
Well, so that's a pretty pessimistic take. It seems like we're aligned there in terms of the outlook for U.S.-China relations. But to bring the question back to you that we started with, where do you fall on the optimism, pessimism scale in terms of MNCs doing business in China, specifically American companies? Is it time to cut and run? Yeah. Is it a good time to be getting in?
Yeah, the fundamental calculation for China at this point is first, do no harm, and as it looks to take countermeasures against the United States, I think what we're seeing is quite clearly a protection of and almost a charm offensive to try to bring FDI into the country, which is so fundamental to its foundational economic growth and stability. So for the Communist Party, maintaining that growth engine is still important, even if they recognize there's a secular slowdown in economic growth rates. As we've discussed before, maintaining employment stability and employment growth and employment expectations is still crucially important for them. And even if we hear narrative in Beijing of indigenous innovation, of sort of economic autarky, of doing it on our own, of walling ourselves off, and they understand how crucial foreign MNCs are for economic performance right now. So while I don't think any of us can predict where or how they'll be treating MNCs, foreign MNCs, 5-10 years from now, at least for these next 12 to 18 months, I actually think it's a window of opportunity for MNCs, which are deft and smart enough to be able to navigate the tensions that are there. And I think the old map we were using is no longer helpful here, that we also need to essentially update our map for navigating this territory. That being said, many of the fundamentals of what is my value proposition for China, looking at all of the grand plans that China is coming up with on improving quality of growth, of technological innovation, whether this is Internet of Things, new economy, Made in China 2025, Belt and Road, has all these grand ambitions, but its indigenous capability to meet all those expectations and ambitions is still limited, and that's where foreign MNCs really have an opportunity there. And whereas 2 or 3 years ago, when you saw a lot of hubris on behalf of Chinese companies and the Chinese government, almost a dismissive, you need our market more than we need you, the calculation has shifted precisely because there's pressure coming from not only the Trump administration, but globally, there's a lot of frustration right now with China. And so that's precisely the window that I think companies need to take advantage of.